Stick around for Digimon, coming up next on Jetix. We'll be right back to Digimon on Jetix. Now, back to Digimon on Jetix. Now, back to Dragon Booster on which is coming up next, right here on Jetix. Next, Power Rangers Generations is coming up right here on Jetix. We'll be right back to Power Rangers Generations on Jetix. Now, back to Power Rangers Generations on Jetix. Coming up next, don't miss Jackie Chan Adventures on Jetix. We'll be right back to Jackie Chan Adventures on Jetix. Now, back to Jackie Chan Adventures on Jetix. Bureau of Alien Detectors is coming up next, only on Jetix. We'll be right back with Cyber 9 New Dawn right here on Jetix. And now, back to Cyber 9 New Dawn right here on Jetix. We'll be right back to Power Rangers Jungle Fury on Jetix. And now, back to Power Rangers Jungle Fury on Jetix. Coming up next is the Incredible Hulk on Jetix. We'll be right back to the Incredible Hulk on Jetix. And now back to the Incredible Hulk on Jetix. Coming up next, it's the Avengers on Jetix. We will return with the Avengers on Jetix. Now, back to the Avengers on Jetix. Coming up next, the Legend of Tarzan on Jetix. Don't miss Shinzo. It's coming up next, only on Jetix. Come on for Power Rangers SPD on Jetix. We'll be right back to Power Rangers SPD on Jetix. Now, back to Power Rangers SPD on Jetix. Power Rangers Mystic Force is coming up next, only on Jetix. We'll be right back to Power Rangers Mystic Force on Jetix. Now, back to Power Rangers Mystic Force on Jetix. Kong is coming up next, right here on Jetix. Don't miss the... Coming up next on Jetix. We'll be right back to Obon Star Racers on Jetix. Now, back to Obon Star Racers on Jetix. We'll be right back to Moncoli Knights on Jetix. Now, back to Moncoli Knights on Jetix. Coming up next, don't miss Adam, only on Jetix. Puka is coming up next, only on Jetix. We'll be right back to Puka on Jetix. Now, back to Puka on Jetix. Coming up next is the X-Men on Jetix. We'll be right back with the X-Men on Jetix. We're back with the X-Men on Jetix. Gargoyles is coming up next, right here on Jetix. Super Robot Monkey Team Hyper Force Go is coming up next on Jetix. We'll be right back to Super Robot Monkey Team Hyper Force Go on Jetix. Now, back to Super Robot Monkey Team Hyper Force Go on Jetix. Don't miss the Tick, coming up next, only on Jetix. Stick around, Yin Yang Yo is coming up next, right here on Jetix. Oh, on Jetix. Now, back to Yin Yang Yo on Jetix. We'll be right back to Legend of the Dragon on Jetix. Now, back to Legend of the Dragon on Jetix. We'll be right back with the Fantastic Four on Jetix. And now, back to the Fantastic Four on Jetix. We'll be right back to the Tick on Jetix. Now, back to the Tick on Jetix. Coming up next, it's Spider-Man on Jetix. We'll be right back to Spider-Man on We'll be right back to Kong on Jetix. Now, back to Kong on Jetix. Coming up next, Chaotic on Jetix. Coming up next, Superman, the animated series on Jetix. We'll be right back to Superman, the animated series on Jetix. And now, back to Superman, the animated series on Jetix. Coming up next, it's Steven Spielberg presents Pinky and the Brain on Jetix. We'll be right back to Steven Spielberg presents Pinky and the Brain on Jetix. And now back to Steven Spielberg presents Pinky and the Brain on Jetix. We'll be right back to Dungeons and Dragons on Jetix. Now, back to Dungeons and Dragons on Jetix. We'll be right back to Adam on Jetix. Now, back to Adam on Jetix. We'll be right back to Silverwing on Jetix. Now, back to Silverwing on Jetix. Now, back to Gargoyle on Jetix. Coming up next, Batman, the animated series on Jetix. Up next, a brand new Yin Yang Yo on Jetix. Coming up next, it's Power Rangers Operation Overdrive on Jetix. We'll be right back with Power Rangers Operation Overdrive on Jetix. We'll be right back to Batman, the animated series on Jetix. And now back to Batman, the animated series on Jetix. Coming up next, it's Spider-Man Unlimited on Jetix. We'll be right back to Spider-Man Unlimited on Jetix. And now back to Spider-Man Unlimited on Jetix. Coming up next, it's Yin Yang Yo